Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. The gig economy is becoming more contentious and more pervasive in the United States. And we have some people from England who have done a study that I myself am looking forward to learning more about. And to talk about it is John Godfrey. He's with us today. And John, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Donald. It's great to be here.
Well, as we always ask our guests, first, John, tell us a little bit about yourself, then about your company, and finally, where people can learn more about you, your company, and the study before we get into it.
Sure, yeah. My background is that I've worked in the City of London in finance for a little bit over 35 years now. My real interest, though, is in public policy issues, because they intersect so much with what we do as a financial services provider. And in the course of my career, I've managed to be lucky enough to take a close interest in lots of policy issues. And in fact, I spent a year away from this company, working as the head of policy in number 10 Downing Street, behind that famous black door, working for Prime Minister May when she was running the UK, several prime ministers ago now, I hasten to add. And one of the things we were looking at the time in government was exactly this question of how do we manage with the gig economy, because there was this transition in the UK towards gig working, nothing like as pronounced as it has been in the US, but it was still happening with Uber and Deliveroo and companies like that. And we started to worry a little bit about, were these folk in that sector treated as employees? Were they treated as contractors? What was their access to benefits and to all the perks that regular employees get? So we commissioned a big study on it by someone called Matthew Taylor, who's well known in the UK. And we can talk about some of the conclusions because they're quite relevant to the US, but that's a little bit of my background. So in terms of legal in general, we are a very old UK financial services company, 186 years old. And we spent most of that 186 years as a provider of life insurance. We, in the last 30 years, branched out to the provision of fund management for pensions and retail financial services as well, in the shape of retirement products and things of that nature. Still doing life and critical illness insurance cover. We now have, roughly speaking, $1.7 trillion in funds under management, and a lot of customers here in the UK, where we're the largest player in our sectors, but also in the United States. We have well over 1 million life insurance clients. So we're very interested in how things are developing in the US, because quite often what happens in the US is a kind of precursor of what happens here. And it's also highly relevant to our business locally in the US, where we have 3 bases: Chicago, Maryland, and Connecticut. So that's really how we got into this. And we see the US, as I said, as a fantastic predictor of global futures, including in the world of work. So the studies that we've done, and there are several parts to it, it's quite a deep study of the gig economy, is all there on our website for people to look at. The website address is group.legalandgeneral. The and is an ampersand, by the way. So group.legalandgeneral.com. And if you just enter US gig economy into that, that'll take you to the reports. But what we can do in the next few minutes, Donald, is talk through some of the highlights of the report, because this feels to us like a really important social and economic phenomenon. And it behooves us, whether we're business owners or managers or investors, whoever we may be, or indeed workers in that sector ourselves, to understand a little bit better what's going on in that space.
Well, what a great introduction. We only ask one thing. You've got to turn your head a little bit to your left, because you're not looking at the audience and you're losing them. Now you're perfect.
Right.
For a man, I'm going to say something. You got a pleasant smile. Okay. Now, having said that, give us some of the highlights of the study, which for one, I'm going to go look at much more thoroughly. But give us some of the highlights, please.
Well, the big theme that comes out of the study is that, the transition, particularly in the US, towards gig working has been really pronounced, and it is something that people, by and large, have been very willing to do. It's a conscious choice. And, we found in the first part of the survey that, almost 70% of the people who took part in that survey said they wanted to carry on working in the gig economy in the foreseeable future. They saw it as a way to give themselves more flexibility. They could do more work or less work as they chose, and they could work when they wanted to work. And some of them didn't particularly like working in the strictures and the constraints of the traditional corporate environment. So it wasn't so much a case of being obliged to go and work as a gig worker because of circumstances. This was the best they could find. They really wanted, in most cases, to go and do it, and they intended to carry on. And what I took away from that really is that most gig workers see themselves as little small businesses in their own right, and they're in control of their destiny. And the reason I think it's so much bigger in the US than in the UK is that it taps absolutely into all these things we know about people in the US, which is this spirit of entrepreneurialism and the kind of go-getting attitude and the love of personal liberty. So people were very in favor, in the main, of working in the gig economy. Now, I was going to say the slight caveat to all this positivity is when you ask people in the gig economy what they see as the negatives, if any, about where they're working, the way they're working, and they will come back and say, yeah, alongside all this additional personal freedom and choice, I worry a little bit about having less access and less ability to save for retirement in a matching 401k, for example, and I have less access to things like health insurance. So they do a little bit miss some of the standard perks that many corporate employees enjoy as part of being in the big structure, as it were. So we dug further into that, and we were trying to think, and it'll be very interesting to watch this debate evolve. How do we get to a point where the perfect blend is available between the ability to choose where and when you work and how much you do, and indeed, in many cases, the ability to earn more as a gig worker than you did as a regular employee? And how do you match that with the right arrangements to make the best provision for your future and your family's future? So this kind of takes us, I think, to the nub of the debate about where next for the gig economy. And I would just say, why is it important to get that right now? It's because when there are big changes in the business world or in the economy, there tends to be an upsurge in gig workers. And we saw this with the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. People lost their jobs. They decided to give gig working a try, and they liked it. We saw it, I think, again with COVID, where people were working from home, working more flexibly. They liked it. They wanted to carry on with it. And, we may see this, at any future stage when there is a little disruption in the economy or in job markets. So we want to make this as an attractive a way of working as we can, and that raises some interesting policy questions.
What are some? We'll continue. Are there other things out of the study that you could share with us?
Yes, absolutely. Well, let me just go back to the balance, if you like, between how you can make more money in the here and now as a gig worker versus how you should be looking after your future as a gig worker. And it's quite striking because about 60% of the survey respondents that we spoke to were just working in the gig economy. They were they didn't have, it wasn't a side hustle for them. This was their main way of making money. And half of those, 49%, so almost half of them, make the bulk of their money working in the gig economy if they're earning less than $50,000 a year. And 23%, quarter of gig workers, earn well over $100,000 a year, and some of them up to £4 million a year. Now, one of the lessons here is that when you talk about gig workers, there is a huge variety of occupations and people you're talking about. It's not one size fits all here. So you're looking at a range of people from, if you like, Uber drivers through to best-selling novelists who sit somewhere at home and tap out the next magnum opus. So there is a huge variety in here, but generally speaking, this is very helpful for earning money in the here and now if you're working in the gig economy. So how do you boost the part of it which is about thinking for the future? And I think this is something which is exercising the minds of people in government and people who are making policy. So, for example, we're seeing some changes in the US which are moving us towards having gig employment and self-employment recognized as a legitimate form of employment. So removing some of the disadvantages that it has versus regular jobs. And the American Rescue Plan is one example of keeping costs down in health insurance for people who are working in that economy or are self-employed. For the higher paid gig workers, there are interesting things happening around tax credits for health insurance. And it is all really a part of enabling the gig worker, who is, as I said right at the beginning, a small business in their own right as an individual. This is how they can become a better manager of human resources for their own personal small business by having better pay and benefits. And the benefits piece counts alongside the pay piece. So I think there are moves ongoing to do this. And that's exactly what, going back into my sort of personal history, we looked at in 2016 or 17 with Matthew Taylor when he did the study in the UK, because it was exactly the same set of issues, although, as you will know, as your listeners will know, health insurance is less of an issue in the UK because we have a free at the point of use health service. But the other issues around retirement and other benefits and statutory entitlement to vacations and things like that were all exactly these issues that we're thinking about in this latest part of the study. But I would just say, Donald, the study is absolutely loaded with statistics. And I can only remember very few of those at any one time. But for people who really want to get into it, this is a great piece of groundwork. And for people who want to think about how to organize their own lives, or if you're running a small business and using contractors and gig workers to deliver some of your goods and services, and you want to treat them right, and you want to get the best deal you can at the same time, this is quite a good informative piece of work to help you do that.
Well, John, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you notice any differences? Let's first start by age. Were the different age groups have different concerns?
I think the one particular concern that did, I think, come out in the survey is the concerns of people who have children. And this was clearly important to a lot of people, that they not only had health insurance for themselves, but that they were making the right provision for their children in case they got sick, which I guess in terms of an age group sort of puts you somewhere in the middle. It's not the very youngest who have, total freedom really from family commitments very often, and it's not the very oldest. But it's that group in the middle who worry about looking after their children's health. And then I think, I don't know to what extent the numbers pull this out for people, but it seemed to me very much the case that if you worry about what your income is going to be in retirement, you tend to worry more about that as you get towards retirement age. It's not front of mind for most people in their 20s, but by the time you're in your late 50s, as I am, it becomes very much front of mind. How am I going to get by when I'm a bit older?
Well, let me. This came up in a recent New York Times article, but the fact is, as a gig worker, when you go to get a mortgage, they look at you and say, "Wait a second, you're self-employed," you know, and there's a whole different set of criteria they use, and which they use to turn you down. Um, did you find any of this in your study?
Not a huge amount of concern specifically about mortgages, although I think it's understood by most people in that space that a longer track record of earnings is required than if you can say I'm somewhere in the payroll of XYZ corporation. But it didn't come out as strongly as retirement and health,
Mhm.
to be honest.
Okay. Well, what about credit rating in general? The gig workers tend to be, unless they've established credit beforehand, seem to have, according to our studies, seem to have greater difficulty getting credit.
Yeah, I think that is right. I mean, it's the same issue about having a track record, isn't it?
Mhm.
Um, Now, the earnings themselves, as I think the survey is pretty clear that for many gig workers, the earnings are higher than they would be just being on a bigger company payroll. Um, but the earnings can clearly be less secure. So you do have to have a track record to establish your credit rating. There's no doubt about that. But asking the survey respondents what they saw as the pros and cons, pluses and minuses of gig working versus traditional style working, um, they were much more focused, I think, on the kind of flexibility and freedom point, and much more focused for about 20% roughly of them on what they saw as a corporate culture point. And there's clearly a lot of people out there who value being able to run their own lives and not being subject to the same sort of hierarchy and
Mm.
set of authority figures that you get if you work in a traditional structure. Now, it might be that even in traditional structured companies, there is more flexibility now than there used to be, but uh, I think you still get more in the gig economy. But people focused very much on those things rather than on issues of what's it going to do to my credit rating and so on, because many of them had proved that they could make a success of working in the gig economy once they got past the
Also,
initial phase.
mhm. Well, um, uh, uh, again, for our audience, your website, so people can get the study.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would recommend going and having a look at this. It's there on group.legalandgeneral.com. The and is an ampersand sign, and go and tap into there and type in US gig economy, and that'll take you to the research.
Okay. Well, we have just a few minutes left, but I guess my basic question is, um, do you see the gay economy expanding?
That seems to be the direction of travel, absolutely. And I think the COVID experience will push that forward. I mean, if we see a reduction of IT, technical data type people directly employed by the big tech companies, I think those people will be able to make themselves a very good living as independents working in the gig economy. And that might be very attractive. It's quite interesting. One of the things we looked at in the past was US housing. And this was right at the time of COVID, as it was kind of towards the end of COVID. And what we were looking at was the movement of people, particularly younger people, in response to house prices. Where did they want to live? Now they could work, at a distance more often and from home. And we saw lots of people who were, we tracked actually the self trailer hire, U-Haul and things like that. Where were people going? And people were moving to different parts of the country where there weren't huge corporate structures to the same extent. And that suggested to me that these folk must be moving to their new dream home somewhere away from the city and setting themselves up as a remote gig worker. Now, they're not all doing that, but that was definitely a trend. And so I see this segment of the economy continuing to grow.
Well, the real interesting question is, the young people go to Brooklyn and the families go to the suburbs. It's
Yes.
that's the case. John, we just have a few minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with?
Well, I would like to leave your audience, I think, with this big idea that your audience is an audience of business people running typically smaller businesses. This is at the smaller end of the smaller business. It's right down to the individual. And if we can enable those individuals who are gig workers to make the best contribution they can make, it helps them and it helps anybody who's using them. So that will include quite a few of your listeners, I hope. So think about, how do you help create the best possible backdrop and economy for people working in the gig sector? And the gig sector doesn't just have to be computer programmers. It can be as broad as you like. There's plenty of people doing a wide variety of things and enjoying doing it. And they will do their best for you if you treat them the right way.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, which occurred to me. As a small business owner, do you think this trend helps or hinders a small business being able to, in effect, buy little pieces of people?
I think this helps because it creates flexibility for the small business owner as well as for the gig worker or the contractor. And there are whole segments of the economy where this has de facto been the case for years. If you think about you're having some work done on your house and you get in the painter and decorator to do something, that person is effectively a gig worker. If you are doing something, a bigger building project, say you're having a garage build, now you'll get a builder to do it. That builder will have on their books a load of people who are carpenters, electricians, plumbers, whatever it may be, all as contractors rather than direct employees in most cases. So this helps small and local businesses be more flexible, tap into the specialist skills when they need them, rather than trying to maintain everybody on their payroll even when business is quiet.
Mm. Well, on that note, John Godfrey, we have to say it's, to me, been a very illuminating time. And I hope, give us one more time the website, because people have got to read this study.
Well, absolutely. Go and check it out on group.legalandgeneral.com and just type in US gig economy, and that should take you directly to it.
Don't forget the Happerstan.
Yeah, the and is an ampersand, yes.
Oh, well, John, it's really been a pleasure. Have a great day, and it really a fascinating study. Thank you.
Been a pleasure talking to you, Donald. Thank you very much.